Welcome to MMO Graveyard, a new series in which we'll take a look back at the large past of previous MMOs, discover how they were successful, why they died off, what new innovations they brought to the MMORPG genre, the pinnacle of their successes, and their last living moments. Today we're going to be talking about one of the most unique MMORPGs ever made, WildStar. So what would happen if 17 former developers from Blizzard Entertainment who were tired of World of Warcraft and had the desire to do something else, formed a gaming studio and created a brand new MMORPG? Well, WildStar is the answer to that question. It all started back in 2005 when a group of members from Blizzard Entertainment broke off and founded the studio which they called Carbine Studios, a studio that eventually grew and employed key personnel from games such as Diablo 2, Metroid Prime, Fallout, EverQuest, City of Heroes, and Half-Life 2, and many other titles that we won't get into in this video. Some of the key developers were Kevin Birdsley, a former lead developer on World of Warcraft, Jeremy Gaffney, a former executive producer on City of Heroes, and Tim Kaine, a lead designer of the original Fallout and co-founder of Troika Games. The original idea behind WildStar was going to be a game that brought a new perspective to the MMORPG market by exploring genres beyond strictly fantasy or sci-fi, though interestingly enough, WildStar pretty much was a fantasy sci-fi MMORPG to begin with. Least to say, there was a lot of challenges this studio faced early on, from leaving that gigantic studio at Blizzard Entertainment, to opening a new studio, to finding unique talent to help build their game, to establishing a new IP. WildStar had its work cut out from it early on. I think what made the development of this game so unique though, is the fact that not only were they going to create a brand new MMORPG, but they were going to do it without an established IP or an established studio. This meant that the odds of the game becoming a success were going to be stacked against them. No established IP means no fans of previous games jumping on board the hype train and getting the message of their game out there to the mass public, and no established studio means nobody knowing what to expect from the studio, and no fan base for the studio. In comparison to games from, say, BioWare or Blizzard, people are not just excited for the games they produce because of the already established IPs, but because they trust BioWare and Blizzard to make good games, and because those game developers had already established their places in the industry. Whereas with Carbine Studios, nobody really knew who they were or what to expect. Later on, upon founding their new studio, the developers really set out and looked for a publisher that would grant them creative freedoms without much executive control. Their goal was ultimately to make a good video game instead of a studio that might just be worth a lot of money in the future that they would just sell off. NCSoft fit their principles that they had already gotten used to working at with Blizzard Entertainment, such as creative freedoms, enough time to make a game until it's done, unlike, for example, Electronic Arts, which forces release dates on their studios, even on unfinished games like, for example, Warhammer Online, Age of Reckoning. To them, NCSoft proved their worth as they were the same publisher that was responsible for Guild Wars, and the previous Blizzard employees who left and formed ArenaNet were granted immense control and freedom over their games, so they were hoping for the same with their studio under NCSoft as well. Kevin Birdsley was quoted as saying in a GameSpot interview that a lot of us still play World of Warcraft, but we're like, hey, we can do this better. So as you can see, the goal from the studio was originally to make a better game than World of Warcraft in the eyes of some of the original World of Warcraft developers, and to truly make a good video game in general. In total, the game took 9 years to develop from late 2005 to launch on June 3rd, 2014. The game itself, though, was only really being worked on for roughly 4 of those years, as the rest of the time was spent establishing the IP and getting the tech working. The game cost roughly around $100 million to make, which is around a quarter to half of what Star Wars The Old Republic, for example, cost to make, just to put things into perspective. And throughout those years, there wasn't much hype circling the game, as a lot of people didn't even really know what to expect, or even really at the time had heard much about the game to begin with through the years of development. There didn't seem to be much funding for this game that was put into marketing. I think the developers had hoped if the game was good enough it would speak for itself, and the game launched as a subscription-based MMORPG and had a peak of at most maybe 100 to 200,000 subscribers in total. So as you can tell from the development of the game, it was for the most part a pretty clean process of development, but a lot of the time was spent on developing the IP and the name and maybe like the artwork and you know, the tech systems and all of that, instead of just actually focusing on the meat of development, which would have been, you know, the script writing and programming and all of that. So it was definitely a very unique form of development, but a very cut and clean development process, and a very cheap development process for how many years the game took to create. So let's take a look at the game's successes. So the game launched, like I said, with roughly around 100,000 to 200,000 subscribers, though official numbers were never reported, and it had an average ranking on Metacritic of 82, which is pretty high considering the fact that most MMOs receive more unfavorable reviews on average. The major things that players enjoyed, and even I enjoyed, was the combat system. It did not function like a typical tab targeting based MMORPG, as the combat was widely action oriented and you had to target all of your abilities yourself. For example, if you wanted to kill something, you had to make sure your character was lined up in the right direction to do so. Players loved the movement in this game as well, as it felt very fluid and engaging and allowed for parkour and fun exploration. You could tailor the game around your personal playstyle, as the game offered 4 paths for you to pick from for your character at the character creation screen, them being Soldier,
Soldiers, legendary heroes in the making. Your mission will be to conquer the deadly creatures, hostile natives, and military opponents you encounter on the planet's surface.
Explorer,
Explorers. Oh, such a bold and adventurous group. Prepare yourselves to chart this wild new frontier, braving some of the most dangerous and inaccessible locations on planet Nexus. Undoubtedly, you think this sounds exciting.
Scientist.
Scientists, for you, knowledge is the ultimate weapon. As you delve into the scientific mysteries of the Elden, you will systematically analyze the exotic flora and fauna found on the planet.
And Settler.
And settlers, dedicated builders and pioneers. Your duty is to tame this hostile alien world, constructing beneficial structures for your friends and allies.
And each path had its own unique flavor. And in the eyes of the developer, picking your class was choosing the way you like to fight, which had 6 options ranging from Warrior, Engineer, Spellslinger, Esper, Stalker, and Medic, and then choosing your path, which dictated your preferable playstyle, Soldier, Explorer, Scientist, and Settler. I don't really need to get into the class system specifically, as it is pretty much what you would come to expect. You pick your class, then you progress through the game as you level up, gain abilities, and then you tailor your character towards your playstyle. However, in WildStar, you invest your Terra points, also known as amps that you get while leveling, into upgrading the skills you choose to use. In WildStar, you only use 8 abilities at a time, as that is the max that can fit on your bar. However, the way in which you combine abilities and use them, you can tailor around to your specific playstyle. The path system was something completely different, however, more comparable to a profession system in other MMOs. For example, if you like to smash buttons and kill things, you would pick the Soldier path, which would, as you quest through the game, open up events and missions that you would go to on the map to kill things, and like assassination type missions. If you picked the Explorer instead of killing things, the games would then open up missions for you to explore the map and do parkour challenges. If you picked Scientist, on the other hand, you would have mission types of cataloging things, running diagnostics, chemistry, and doing archaeology, among other things. And then if you picked the Settler, you would have mission types around building infrastructure, getting supply caches, doing the public service tasks, and civil defense type missions. Paths would unlock rewards, XP, and certain abilities, and the game actually offered a lot of freedom in the choices you can make for your character that you could tailor around your playstyle, which I thought was a great strength for this game, as it, like I said, it had both the path system and then the class system, which would give the player a lot of options for what they would like to do in the game. The game also launched with surprisingly a 40-man raid system in an attempt to bring back the gigantic feel from older raids in MMOs like World of Warcraft. Though this didn't last long as the game bled subscribers fast, it kind of was a cool thing to see at launch. The reason I put this down as a success, which might cause controversies, and specifically I put it down because it gave the hardcore raiders and the hardcore player base the option of reliving some older glorious experiences. To some extent, WildStar attempted to bring back hardcore raiding content and content that was challenging to clear and required massive teamwork. The raids were very well laid out and intense and required significant coordination in order to be successful in. The game honestly had one of the best raiding environments at launch out of any MMORPG ever released, and it was clear that they were really trying to cater to that hardcore PvE audience in other MMOs. Another thing WildStar did great was player housing. Players would gain a plot of land to lay down a house at a certain level, housing models would be based on race, on top of which other characters on the player's account could access the house if added as neighbors. Decorations and furniture was available through crafting, vendors, quest rewards, and loot drops, which gave players an incentive to go out and complete content. You could even customize the ambient lighting of a house on a room-by-room basis, and place decorative items and furniture basically anywhere, so it allowed for a lot of customization options. You could also visit random player housing plots if they mark their plot as public, and they could visit yours. Honestly, WildStar has one of the best, if not the best, player housing system on the MMORPG market to date, and you should definitely check it out if you're really into the player housing. The game also had a very fun PvP system, and while competitively it was kind of a joke with time, the game at least had open world PvP. WildStar basically had everything a PvP player would have wanted, from battlegrounds to arenas to duels, and a unique system called war plots, in which the player could gather up to around 39 friends, with PvP skills preferably, then buy a war plot, and then customize it, and then fight against other players in PvP. Basically imagine a 40 vs 40 battlefield with customizable battle fortresses. The game also had a very strong PvE system with a hardcore raiding environment, dungeons, adventures, and ship hands, things I can't get all into specifically for the sake of time. Just know that the game was loaded with a fair amount of PvE content and very unique and strong PvP system to boot. I label both these systems as being successful as they offered the player a lot of content choices, and both were very well done, better than most MMORPGs on the market today. In conclusion, I believe WildStar's biggest strength was the fact that it gave the player the ability to truly tailor their playstyle to their liking through the path system, and offered a strong PvE and PvP environment in combination with player housing. The combat system, also known as the telegraph system as they called it, was also superb and really makes me wish more MMOs had a similar system. The system, in short, just for those of you that don't know, can be described as the backbone behind WildStar's extremely fun combat. While aiming a skill, you'll see a blue shape appear on the ground, which indicates exactly where that attack or heal will land, and likewise, enemies will also project their attacks on the ground, giving you the opportunity to dodge around to prevent heavy damage. This combat system was just amazing and really fun and very skill-based. This game, in terms of raw content, offered everything you could have ever wanted in an MMORPG. Unfortunately though, like most MMOs before it, it would be unable to capture a mass audience. In fact, this could very well be the last great new MMO we see for some time. So the game had a great endgame, the game had player housing, the game had superb systems, and the game had pretty much everything an MMO player could possibly want. So what went wrong? Keep in mind, these are more so just my personal opinions and opinions others have made public over the past few years, but I think the biggest thing that went wrong was the fact that the market just is not there anymore for this kind of game. Subscription-based MMOs and the subscription-based market has kind of gone with time in favor for a more free-to-play market. WildStar would have done better if it had launched with a free-to-play model over a subscription-based model, as many people are not willing to shell out $15 a month anymore, and because of that, the genre as a whole is unable to make as much money as it used to. The biggest problem is that developers look at World of Warcraft as being the pinnacle of the subscription-based model and try to copy it, without understanding why the subscription-based model for World of Warcraft works in the first place. Keep in mind though, even WoW is not gaining as much as it used to with the subscription-based model, and has slowly, through its own in-game shop, seemed to have transitioned to a more free-to-play system with time, as you can play WoW for free up to a certain level, buy subscription renewals with gold, buy level cap characters with real money along with mounts and pets. There's also the fact that every single MMO that has launched with a subscription-based model switched over to the free-to-play model with an in-game shop later on. WildStar's biggest mistake was banking on a subscription-based model instead of keeping as a free-to-play game, as they were targeting a market that no longer exists. If the game had launched more in line with Guild Wars 2, it likely would have done much better. The second biggest failure of the game is the fact that the marketing just wasn't there for it. Nobody knew what this game was, nobody had even really have heard of this game before, and nobody really knew anything about it outside of the hardcore MMO audience. Word of mouth isn't always the greatest thing to bank on. If the game received more marketing and viral support, it would have attracted more customers to it, and by the time some people had even heard of this game, it had bled so many subscribers that it was almost worth not playing. It makes me wonder though, even with the increased marketing, if it would have mattered because of the subscription-based barrier in the first place. The third biggest failure was the fact that this MMO had kind of a wonky theme to it. Now this is probably the most opinionated thing you will hear in this entire video, but the game just had this really strange feel to it. It almost felt like something out of a Pixar movie, and it was combining fantasy with sci-fi in combination with some weird Western themes. To me, the clash of these themes just didn't work very well, and I think if players were to even research the game, they might have been turned off by the theme alone and not have given the game a chance, as the IP was not established and the art style was very unique and weird for an MMO. The game's character creator outside of class and path options was also very weak, giving players limited options to design their characters with. This was another MMO with two factions called the Exiles and the Dominion. Basically, the names of those factions would give for what you would expect their faction themes to be, along with 8 races. Some of the races were very unique in style, which is a good thing. However, the characters' creation options outside of race selection were very weak, and on the same level or even weaker to WoW's character creation options to some extent, which is pretty sad. There is also the fact that the user interface is kind of bad and leaves a lot to be desired. While it's practical, it's also kind of clunky and just in general kind of ugly to look at. Honestly, the weakest thing about this MMO, at least visually for me, is probably the UI. Luckily, the overall clunkiness and ugliness can be fixed to some extent with add-on support, but the game would have had a better flavor to it with a better UI. Even the character creation server selection UI is just plain ugly to look at, and an instant turn off from the game. Developers should have put more time into the UI, as it's going to be the first thing players have to look at when booting the game up, and first impressions really are everything. It should also be noted that the timing of the launch was also kind of bad, as WoW's next expansion, the biggest MMORPG on the market, was on its way in, and by the time people had given up on WildStar or seen most of the content in WildStar, the WoW expansion was upon release. They should have timed the launch of the game a few months after WoW's expansion rather than before, as it would have been a good option for WoW players wanting to jump ship from Warlords of Draenor. Players also cited the reason for failure as being the fact that the game was just too hardcore focused, though in my personal opinion, I think the game's hardcore focus was far down the list for its main issues. After the game's release, 40% of the dev team was cut due to the game not being as profitable as the developers had hoped, and unfortunately, not every game worth playing can achieve massive success, especially in this kind of market. In conclusion, I believe the game's biggest failure was the fact it launched at the wrong time, too close to WoW's release, and did not have enough marketing in combination with the subscription-based model that they went with. So where does this game stand right now? Is it still playable, and is it still worth playing? Well, the game has changed quite a bit over the past 2 years. There's still a free-to-play model now with a cash shop in-game where you can buy certain things with cosmic points. There's no major restrictions to the content, though you'll have to pay for extra character slots, and like most cash shops, there are pay-to-win features involved. You will gain more rewards if you pay into the system rather than if you don't. The game is not completely pay to win, but you will gain more for paying and have some advantages over others who do not pay, which in my opinion does constitute as pay to win. That does not mean that the game is no longer worth playing, however, as it's no more pay to win as 99% of other MMOs on the market. I mean, let's get real here guys. In World of Warcraft, you can buy a level capped character, so basically every MMORPG is pay to win right now to some extent. This game is currently on Steam right now, and you can download it for free if you would like to give it a try. I would recommend it to anybody looking for a unique MMORPG experience. Just keep in mind that the population has dwindled with time, so don't expect massive amounts of players to greet you when you log in. I really feel like WildStar is one of the better MMORPGs on the market right now, and that it does not and did not get the attention and recognition that it deserved. In my opinion, this might be one of the last great MMORPGs we see released until the MMORPG market picks back up again. Who knows guys, maybe it never will, right? So thanks for watching guys. As always, rate, comment, and subscribe, and let me know what you think below. In the next episode, we're going to be covering Rift, and if you have an MMORPG you would like me to cover specifically, please let me know in the comments and I might check it out.
You